Okay, if you get to conditions where it's just not at all clear which way to go, you're getting to conditions where figuring out which way to go in detail would be incredibly complicated, much more complicated than economics. And economics is still struggling to be a science. But I mean, nobody. So clearly, we don't understand economic systems with any real success at this point. We can keep being blindsided by how they behave, but nobody doubts that there are right and wrong ways to respond to a global banking catastrophe, say. And I think to carve out a space of truth, of real truth, a space where we recognize there are truth claims to be made about good and evil, or truth claims to be made about economics.
It is a now
acknowledge are the easy cases. I mean, that's why I appeal to the easy cases, because it's like with economics, economists can disagree about how to respond to a global economic crisis. The science is such, and the complexity of the system under analysis is such that we may never be confident about the right answer, but we know there are wrong answers. If someone got on CNN and said, "Well, I've got the solution," let's just destroy all material wealth. Let's just have a huge potlatch where we just burn buildings and ruin everything. Okay, and then we'll have to build it again, and that's a brilliant idea. It's going to put everyone to work. Okay, that's pretty clearly the wrong answer. Now, we know there are better. We know there are right and wrong answers. We know there are ways to fail where your beliefs can be erroneous, and that's. I'm arguing this is, if it's true for something like economics, it's also true for morality.
Hello. My question stems from one basic observation. So while in general I agree with what I was being said, if you look at all the cases that have been cited as examples, I tend to think they always vary at the extremes. So it's either about throwing acid, or it's about, as in this case, advocating a complete doing away with material wealth. What I was thinking was morality is important in this context, not only in the extreme cases where the general public, say in a forum like this, tends to agree that some things are wrong. So we're not talking about what the Taliban does or certain acts which are clearly immoral to a large number of people, but about the much more complicated areas. So there are a huge number of people who technically believe in science, as in they believe in scientific ways of solving problems like health problems, but they also look at religion for moral answers. And these are questions which are not necessarily to do with murder or death or things which are that extreme. So in that context, my question is, if we assume that religion is the only source of morality, and as a solution to that, and we agree there's problems with that, and as a solution to that, if we offer science as the counter source of truth, are we not sort of just advocating supplementing one canon of truth at one level by another? As opposed to which, as Professor Dawkins said, wouldn't the better solution be to advocate a scientific process of reasoning as a better means of achieving at morality than at science as a source of morality? Because, I mean, if we just look at something, for example, most people who go to doctors, a lot of people who go to doctors don't go because they know the exact scientific reasons for why medicine is successful. They go to doctors because they see practical results. So don't you think the focus of science should be on advocating an increased acceptance of scientific reasoning than as science in itself as a canon of truth?
Yeah, I don't think you can keep those two apart, though. I mean, when we're advocating scientific reasoning, when we're advocating having your convictions scale with evidence and cogent arguments, then we are of necessity attacking religion, or so people like Richard and myself argue. I mean, there is a zero-sum conflict between believing things for good reasons and believing things for bad reasons. And so that distinction is already intrusive of people's sanctities. And insofar as we make any kind of mature progress in the sciences of mind, we are just of necessity going to be divulging truths about human well-being that will be scientifically true and actionable. It's just as science comes forward and says at some point, listen, smoking is a cause of lung cancer. You shouldn't do it. If you care about avoiding lung cancer, don't smoke. That's not an Orwellian, intrusive guys in white lab coats, the morality police grabbing you. That is just information which is now actionable. And there are conditions where it becomes coercive. I mean, if you let your children smoke, if you're giving cigarettes to a 3-year-old, you are a bad parent, and the state has an interest in preventing you from doing that to your child. And there could be analogous discoveries in just how we can thrive in a moral domain. I mean, in the United States, 20 of the 50 states have made it legal, or it's still legal, it's long been legal, to beat children in their schools with a significant wooden paddle. I mean, not just a rap on the knuckles, but actually, a strange man comes up and beats your child with a wooden board. This is legal, and hundreds of thousands of children every year are beaten, sometimes bloody, by their teachers, not with the consent of their parents. I mean, and this is needless to say, is all anchored to religion and proverbs, not to spare the rod on a child. And from the point of view of psychological science, this is not good. This is not good for children. And at a certain, we may not know that now at the level of data in a way that's utterly compelling, or it can be made utterly compelling. But if we know anything, if we discover anything at all about how children can develop healthily in a cognitive and emotional sense, at some point it's going to be like smoking causes lung cancer, and that will be, by definition, intrusive into people's. It won't be just a matter of reasoning. It'll be a matter of science saying what is good for us.
I once saw a film of a child, I think in the New Guinea highlands, that was at the mother's breast. It had a cigarette in its hand, taking alternate drags at the breast and at the cigarette.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Hello. You talk about often the worst thing ever possible and the best thing ever. And I would argue that actually that's a bit of a religious idea about heaven and hell. And that, in fact, none of them could be really bad or really great, because then you'd see someone else be doing it and then it would be better for you or something, It's implausible. So I would ask you, aside from those grounds of something that's incredibly good and something incredibly bad, and you thinking that something is incredibly bad is bad, there could be other grounds based on actual reality as we know it.
Well, it's just, I'm not saying that it's something that's likely to come about. I'm saying it's the conceptual frame in which I think we have to think about moral truth, and this is the frame in which we can acknowledge that truths exceed any individual's ability to know them. It's possible that all of us in this room are wrong about physics. There may be physicists in this room, but we do not completely understand physics, and much that we think we understand is wrong. This is what it means to be living in a universe where reality is what is real when nobody's paying attention. I mean, there are background truths against which we're reasoning. I'm saying there are background possibilities of experience that we could all be cognitively closed to, that are still potentially available to minds like our own or minds different from our own, and those potentialities exceed our grasp of necessity. And for instance, it's intelligible to say that something could we could be sort of all bombarded with a neurotoxin now without our knowledge, and we could all get a little less happy. Okay, we could all have our state of well-being just slightly diminished, and not necessarily be aware of it, but all just be a little cranky for the rest of our lives. Okay, that's something that is anchored to a biological fact about us, and it's a space of changes that we may be dimly aware of or just not aware of, and yet it still could be a fact.
One last question.
Yeah. First of all, I'd just like to say that I think your project is a good one. I would like to ask a question of clarification between the relationship between philosophy and science. Reading your book, it's clear that you haven't committed what many critics have said is you've committed Hume's fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy. But given what you've said tonight, there's some ambiguity and possible inconsistency in what you're saying. One statement you said that all sciences have philosophical presuppositions, and in a later statement you said that there really wasn't a distinction between philosophy and science. But I think it is.
I think those are the same statement.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
At least to my ear, they're the same statement.
But the foundational principle of what you're saying, and I do agree with you, of ethics as well-being, you get that from philosophical argument. You get that from reason and reflection and deliberation. You do not get that from observation or experiment. But if you were to get that from observation and experiment, then you would be committing Hume's fallacy. You would be deriving it not from an is. Philosophy is intrinsically normative. The natural sciences are more or less purely descriptive. Now, there is things like applied sciences, like engineering and medical science, which does have values to it. So, could you just sort of clarify the relationship between science and philosophy?
Yeah. Well, I try in my opening. I tried to argue why I think that distinction doesn't hold. That my discussion of the chemistry of water, for instance, when you look at how we establish the most basic value-free fact, it is based on other actually value-laden maneuvers, which is we value evidence, we value logic, we value understanding. And if you don't, you can notice that these are values the moment you encounter someone who doesn't value them. And in fact, we know at the level of the brain that this fact-value distinction disappears. There's reason itself is value-laden. It's anchored to emotion in a very direct way. So, for instance, if I say something to you that seems implausible, that feels a certain way. Doubt is an emotion, and if you damage the part of the brain that registers that, you damage reasoning. This is not the separation of reason and the passions is only in the extremes. Does that make any sense? At the core, there's a good neuroanatomical case to be made that this fact-value distinction doesn't make that much sense. Well, it's a claim about truth. It's a claim about what exists, whether or not we know it. Now, that is the frame in which we do all science and all philosophy, and it only becomes science when you can describe the experiment that you would do. This isn't actually even entirely true, because there's a lot of physics that seems to go on in the absence of a conceivable experiment for quite some time. But physics gives us a picture of the world. Say this is, the many worlds thesis of, there are multiple universes, say, that could have copies of ourselves living out different lives. Say that's a physical claim based on some data, but we don't have an experiment that's going to resolve that now or perhaps ever. And yet it's a picture of reality that has scientific bona fides. It's a description of what exceeds our immediate purview. I'm saying the same can be said about the possibilities of experience. The same, it's just there are conscious experiences available based on what consciousness is and the laws of nature. And this captures everything we can conceivably mean by right and wrong and good and evil, as witnessed by the fact that if you imagine the worst possible suffering for everyone, that is clearly the ground out of which all against which all negative moral judgments can be measured. And so I just don't see the split. I think we've learned to split science and philosophy. We've learned to split facts and values in our language, and I think we're being misled by language. I think we have the space of truth claims, possible truth claims, about which we form beliefs, and our beliefs can be justified to a better or worse degree.
Okay. That was a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for coming. I know there's lots more questions out there. I just apologise that we haven't had time to have more, but thank you very much. I'm sure we'd all like to thank Sam.
Thank you very much.